Okay. All right. This week is Sivan. Every year, but I try generally to speak about Sivan uh, when Sivan approaches. Sivan was a day associated with calamity, and over in different periods of time, and and I think there are lessons, even though for the most part, except for Hasidic communities, some Hasidic communities, Bells and Square, I think, the Chav Sivan is not observed. Uh, there are lessons to be learned from about Chav Sivan. Now, historically, the one who designated Chav Sivan as a day of actually as a fast day was Rabbeinu Tam, and this was in the year of 1171 in Blois, France. I don't know. I probably don't pronounce the French correctly. Whatever, Blois, France. What happened over there? I've seen a number of versions of it, but there was a non-Jew who claimed that the Jews had killed a non-Jewish child, and as a result of his claim, and then there's in some versions what I read was this person himself, this non-Jew, who made the claim, observed. He observed that there was a Jew watching him as he threw the body of a non-Jewish child who he had just killed into the river, into some body of water. According to others, no one was ever able to find the body of the non-Jewish child, and it could be that no child was ever murdered. I don't know. But whatever it was, while it was not the first blood libel, sometimes people refer to it, and I did myself, that this was the first blood libel against the Jews in Europe. But it seems historically that's not correct. But it seems that it was the first blood libel that did not just involve some of the church people, which it did not just involve the mobs that were aroused by these false claims and would make pogroms against the Jewish people, but here the local government was involved. And I think today we are facing a similar problem, because we'd see with all the demonstrations that take place against the Jewish people, many local governments, these were governments we felt that were protecting the rights of all its citizens. And somehow they get involved when it's too late. And we're not just talking about the attacks on religious Jews. Look at the college campuses, the so-called areas of enlightenment. And when police do come, it's long after the damage is done. And the government and the school administration protects those who harass the Jewish students. And very often, they try their best not to cooperate, even when the police do show an interest. And the police very often really want to get involved. But there are those who interfere. There are those that give a message. Synagogues are broken into. And not only that, even churches that don't cooperate, who do not share the philosophy of the anti-Semites, are broken into. And the government, it's the local governments, don't get involved. In a sense, there is a feeling of not being protected, which many Jews in the United States felt beforehand. And somehow, many Jews are slow to recognize the changing situation. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a Rosh Yeshiva in a town in Lithuania called Ritava. I mentioned the story once before. And it was a small town, very religious town, but he wasn't able to make ends meet. So he went to the United States and he got a job in the United States as a Rav of a Kehillah. And he would send, of course, in those days, they thought that if your family moves to the United States, they will give up complete observance. So he went to the United States and he would send money regularly back to the family, to support the family. And after 5 years, he returned, having been the Rosh Yeshiva of the town. So, of course, when he returned, they asked him to speak in the shul. And when he spoke in the shul, he said to the people, I've been away for 5 years. You have been here every day of those 5 years. The people of the town, he was saying this. He says, when I left the town, Jews felt safe. They would go out at night. They would walk in the streets at night. I come back now and I see that you're scared to walk in the streets at night. It didn't make an impact on you. Why? Because the difference that took place from one day to the other was very small. So you get used to it. But I was gone for 5 years. I didn't become used to it. And over the period of the 5 years, I see the major changes taking place. And he said, I was told this story by my uncle, my mother's brother, Rabbi Yisrael Shurin. He was the son-in-law of Rabbi Calamities. And he told me the story. He was a boy at the time. He actually had been a Talmud in Telz in Europe. And he said that the people in the shul were smiling. My grandfather said, you have to move, you have to leave. He sensed the insecurity. But when the differences are over a 5-year period, and it's a small amount from day to day, those who are there that whole 5-year period don't sense the difference. And of course, we know what happened with the Holocaust. And it wasn't just the Nazis. It was the people of the town who should have been the enemies of the Nazis. Independent of the Jewish question. But they gave support to the Nazis in massacring and killing all the Jews of the town. Some of the members of the town were buried alive. But everybody was killed. And the in a sense, so we're in a period of time where the government gives a message. Sometimes it's an unwritten message, but I will protect your right to cause trouble for the Jews. The Jews in Europe, the Jews in Ritva, in my parents' town, in my grandparents' town, they didn't recognize the danger, but it was over a 5-year period. But we see the changes that took place overnight. And for some reason, you hear all kinds of nonsense from Jews. Some who speak on behalf of the murderers due to their very bad self-perspective of being a Jew. And you have also among the non-Jews, but just certainly among the non-Jews, but the government who supposedly protects the rights of everyone. We should have a sense of insecurity. And when the massacre took place in France, it was one town. And in that one town, because of a claim that was made, no, not even the body was found. And certainly there was no proof, no evidence that the Jews did it. And if anything, at least according to one report I read, the murderer, who was a non-Jew, was observed murdering the non-Jewish child. But that was irrelevant. What was relevant is that it was the Jews. And so because of this, they took 31 Jews, rounded up 31 Jews, two of whom, according to what I read, were Balei HaTosfos, involved in composing the Tosfos. And they took 17 women and children. And they told them that if you convert to Christianity, your lives will be spared. But if you do not convert to Christianity, you're going to be burnt alive. And every one of those 31 Jews refused to convert. And they were all burnt at the stake. There are all kinds of stories. How at first the fire didn't work. And of course, it's mentioned that I saw everybody mention that as they were burning, they said, Aleinu l'shabeach l'dot hakol. And I saw that some say that that was the reason. That was the start of the custom to include Aleinu at the end of every tefillah. Whatever it is, Rabbeinu Tam at that time instituted a fast. And I've read that, again, it's many years ago, I don't remember where I saw it, that Rabbeinu Tam said that fast, and that happened on Chav Sivan, on the 20th day of Sivan. And Rabbeinu Tam said that the fast of Chav Sivan will become more important than Tzom Gedalia, than the fast of Gedalia, which we observed the day after Rosh Hashanah. And of course, that never happened. And perhaps for a while, this fast was observed. Rabbeinu Tam himself died, I think, a few weeks, 2 weeks after he made this takana, after he made this decree. Rabbeinu Tam and his brother, the Rashbam, at that time, probably the Rashbam had already passed away. So Rabbeinu Tam himself was considered the leader of Ashkenazic Jewry. When the Rashbam was alive, the two of them together served as the spiritual leaders. And they had the ability to make all kinds of xeros, all kinds of takanos. That were necessary at that time for the Jewish community. And then there were other massacres that took place in the 1200s on that date. And it probably reinforced to a certain degree the takana of Rabbeinu Tam. But again, over years, that fast day, of course, they would say slichas on that fast day. And in the slichas, there was an accounting given of the tragedy that took place, of the Jews that were massacred, in addition to those that were burnt at the stake. Many were killed. But then in the year 1648 to 1649, you had the Chomensky, the Xeros, Tach V'Tat. Chomensky, considered like the liberator of Ukraine, a major anti-Semite. And he went from town to town, killing Jews. There are all kinds of numbers of Jews. I've seen said tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. I've seen numbers as close to 500,000 were killed. In those days, it was hard to keep records. But it was a major, major catastrophe. It was like ancient bias, ancient mess. Unfortunately, a pasuk that's used in regard to the enemies of the Jewish people in Egypt was applied to the Jewish houses. And at that time, the Vad Arba Ratzos, that was the rabbinic board, so to say, that were the spiritual leaders of the Jews of that area of Europe, Poland, Polish area, Ukraine, Russia. So they declared, again, Chav Sivan, as a day of fasting because of the tragedy that took place. And I saw, why was Chav Sivan chosen? Okay, in the time of Rabbeinu Tam, we understood why Chav Sivan was chosen. Because that's when those 31 Jews were burnt, were set aflame while being alive. Men, women, children. Even though Jews were killed after that incident, but they identified it with that incident. Now, the truth of the matter is that there is a certain question, even with Chav Sivan. So Chav Sivan was after the first Crusades. Technically, was after the second Crusades. Jews were killed in the second Crusades also, but it wasn't like the first Crusade and the third Crusade, which sometimes is called the second Crusade. So, and no fast day was proclaimed for the Jews that were massacred in the first crusade. And the question is, why is it that way? It's brought down that after Rabbeinu Tam declared Chav Sivan in 1171 as a fasting, because as a day of fast and the mourning, because of what happened in France in one town, the Jews who observed that fast day focused not just on the massacre that took place in that town, but they saw it as a day of fasting and mourning because of what happened in that town, as well as what happened in the first crusade. And we really have to understand, why did they wait? And why is it that what happened in one town, of course, it's a great tragedy, but certainly it wasn't the thousands and thousands of Jews that were killed during the Crusades. So why, according to Rabbeinu Tam, did they wait for this incident? And without asking that question, there's something in the Sefer Vagon Moshe Feinstein, he mentions there. He sees the Crusades as being a national calamity, whereas what happened in the town, tragic as it was an event that happened in one town. A national calamity, Moshe Feinstein said, and it has a basis, the way some interpret, not everybody interprets the kinnis that way, that when you have a national calamity that happens during Golus, during exile, we don't set up a special fast day. We do it, we observe it together with Tisha B'Av. However, Rav Moshe felt that a localized event, and for some reason he considered the Chomensky event also somewhat localized. So attempts were made to make fast days commemorating it. But a national event, Rav Moshe suggests that should be the observance of that tragedy should be reserved for Tisha B'Av, because it's part of the greater picture of the Churban. But it still has to be understood. And to a certain degree, one would think that even the local events should be seen as part of the Churban also. Now, but so that's as far as the event that took place in Blois, France. It happened in Chav Sivan. But the Chomensky massacre Holocaust, if you want, that took place was over a 2-year period. And even after the 2 years, there was isolated incidents for at least 10 more years. So why is it that Chav Sivan was chosen as the day, the 20th of Sivan, which comes out this week? And for some reason, over the passage of time, people stopped observing Chav Sivan. And I want to understand, why did they stop observing Chav Sivan? How did they come to stop observing Chav Sivan? And this is a question that is raised by others as well. And I saw some of the answers, and I was not satisfied with those answers. Some of them, based on the information we have, were historically wrong. Anyway, so some attribute, because on Chav Sivan, there was a major catastrophe during the Chomensky reign of terror in a town in Ukraine called Neimrov. Neimrov in Ukraine. And because of that, they chose that day. Apparently, great Rabbanim were killed there. And many, many Jews were killed, massacred. And to a certain degree, the Shach apparently composed a certain sefer. The Shach was constantly on the run for the 2-year period. The Taz was on the run for the 2-year period. The Tosfos Yontif was on the run for the 2-year period. Jews everywhere were running from place to place. Every day, every night, they had a hideout somewhere else. And so why was Chav Sivan chosen? And the Shach, who was one of those who instituted or reinstituted the fast of Chav Sivan, gives 2 answers to that question. One answer, and it's quoted, I don't have this special sefer that the Shach wrote concerning the tragedy of the Chomensky reign, Chomensky revolt, whatever, Chomensky murderers. But the Shach says, on one hand, because Chav Sivan had already been picked years earlier, probably was not observed throughout all the years, but was picked as the day that Rabbeinu Tam, because of the incident that took place in 1171 in France. And the question is, this was a new incident. Why is it that they wanted to identify what took place in the late 1640s, 1648 through 1649? They proclaimed the fast day, I think, in 1650, or reproclaimed in 1650. But they wanted to identify it with the takana that 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 Rabbeinu Tam made, the decree that Rabbeinu Tam made in the year 1171. We have to understand why. And then he gave a second reason, which also requires understanding. And he said, because Chav Sivan was one of those days that never falls out on a Shabbos. Never falls out on a Shabbos. And so they wanted a day that doesn't fall out on the Shabbos. And my question is, why? We know Tisha B'Av, the ultimate day of sadness, the ultimate day of tragedy, falls out on the Shabbos. So we postpone the fast to Sunday. So why all of a sudden here we don't postpone? We don't postpone. We say if it we don't want it falling out in the Shabbos. We can postpone the fast day when it falls out on Shabbos, like all the other fast days. We could postpone it to Sunday. Why here not? And I should mention, I mentioned already, it's that certainly past World War II, post World War II, almost no one observes Chav Sivan as a fast day. But the Hungarian Jews, there is a group of Hungarian Jews that do observe it because this is the season, especially among the Belzer Chassidim and the Square Chassidim. Because of the Holocaust, and these were the days when their communities were attacked by the Nazis, where the Jews were being taken out to be killed. And because of that, some of the Hungarian Hasidic communities, specifically and especially Belz and the Square Chassidim, they observe in some form or shape Chav Sivan even to this day. Also, I read, wasn't aware of this, that Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank wanted to establish Chav Sivan or re-establish Chav Sivan as a day of fasting because this was the day that the Jews were expelled, killed out from the old city of Yerushalayim. And while there was attempts among members of the chief rabbinate to do that, it never really happened. So I want to understand, why is it that way? And now what's the purpose? The Rabbeinu Tam, I mentioned already, that even though in the First Crusade, they didn't proclaim a fast day. Rabbeinu Tam, when an incident happened in Blois, France, he did proclaim. Why is it that way? I mentioned the pshat that from Moshe Feinstein, Zatzal, he didn't ask that question, but in his tshuva there, it's apparent that that would have been the answer that he would have given. If I recall correctly. I think Rabbeinu Tam understood that what happened in one town is not going to happen, is going to happen in all the towns of Europe. Once he saw that in one town, the government, instead of protecting its Jewish population, not only that, they guaranteed the Jewish population that they will protect them. But that never happened. It's not going to be limited to that one town. And it's possible that many Jews thought the crusade was an unusual event. You're not going to have one crusade immediately after another. So it's not with the catastrophe of the crusade itself, but that was part of the ongoing exile. That was part of the ongoing exile. So Tisha B'Av, in a sense, there wasn't a sense of insecurity after the crusade was over. Rabbeinu Tam felt, and he said that he said it would be, according to some, he said that this would be stronger than Tzom Gedalia. Why would it be stronger than Tzom Gedalia? Halachically, we could explain it. According to some Shitos, Gedalia was killed in Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, but we obviously can't fast in Rosh Hashanah. So the fast day is postponed to the day after Rosh Hashanah. So some Shitos say that we always treat Tzom Gedalia as a nidcha, because there are certain leniencies involved in a fast day that is a postponed fast day, as to a fast day that falls out on the day of the event itself. And we know Chav Sivan never falls out in the Shabbos. So Chav Sivan is never a postponed fast. It's never a postponed fast day. Whereas the other fast days, whereas Tzom Gedalia, according to some Shitos, again it's a machlokus, is always a postponed fast day. What's the difference? I think the difference is the following. This might be the basis for the halachas that make a difference between a postponed fast day and a non-postponed fast day. If it's on a postponed fast day, so we're not in a sense going back in time. We're looking back. Time moves in a circle And when we come historically, where the halacha creates a re-experiencing, so we're back at that time. Perhaps we can suggest there's a difference between Tisha B'Av that is postponed and Tisha B'Av that's not postponed. Tisha B'Av that is not postponed. We are standing there at the time of the Churban. If a person has a child who is undergoing bris milah, the halach is he has to fast the whole Tisha B'Av. We don't say it's his yontif. How can it be your yontif? The Beis HaMikdash is burning in front of you. But if it's a postponed fast day, so we can say, in a sense, you don't go back to the date of the catastrophe. You're looking back in time. So we could say, if it's a yontif for you, you have a son that had a bris milah, you're a moel, you're a sandik. So fast half a day. It's a yontif. It's a yontif for you. So, but we have to understand, why was it so important? So that's the reason we could suggest that the on Chav Sivan, but we have to understand, why is it that Chav Sivan, it was so important, certainly later on, that it should not be postponed. Now, and then, so therefore, after all, if Tisha B'Av can be on a Shabbos and postponed to Sunday, what's significant about Chav Sivan? And why? Now, I think we know. We say, "V'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalseinu, v'hakadosh baruch hu matzileinu miyadam." You know, when I talked, unfortunately, it's dor holech v'dor ba. Unfortunately, you know, we say one generation goes, another generation comes. So long. There was a time when most of our community, or a large part, certainly of the Orthodox community, were survivors. They saw what happened in World War II. But with the passage of time, even the generation that heard from the previous generation, it's not the same generation. It's Dor Holech, the Dor Ba. It's different generations. So long as we were together with them, we were part of their generation and they were part of our generation. But because so many, there's still survivors, but you didn't have the multitudes because of the passage of time. It's not just that they're gone. It's a different generation that's here now. Dor Holech v'Dor Ba. It's a new generation that is here. But we do have memories of what they told us. Some people try to forget. And I ask people, why didn't they run? They didn't know the extent of what was happening in all the other places. And there were people who escaped and warned them. But that need to feel secure blinded them from seeing the facts. People told me, people from Hungary told me that sometimes someone with the Polish Jews were taken first, and there was sometimes one would escape, and they would escape into Hungary, and they would warn the Hungarian Jews, and they said, the people appeared to be crazy to us. We didn't listen. But that's a general tendency among the Jewish people. The Jews were spread out over the whole world. And because of our need to feel secure, and sometimes it's because of our false reliance on those who proclaim they're our friends, in spite of everything that they do. Because of that, we make believe that it was just over there. And this is what Rabbeinu Tam felt. Rabbeinu Tam felt, perhaps initially they didn't proclaim a fast by the Crusades, because the Crusades was not something that would repeat itself day after day after day, year after year after year. It took hundreds of years between the Crusades and Chomensky. But Rabbeinu Tam understood that a pogrom in one city, especially when the leaders of the city, unlike the leaders of some of the people's leaders of some of the cities of the United States, right now, what happens in one city will happen in another city. And if there's any proof to it, we are standing, it's not 5 years difference. October 7th was in Gaza, outside Gaza. October 8th, 9th, 10th, it was everywhere. 11th, 12th, for 2 years, the so-called enlightened ones. And then what did they point to? They pointed, the Jews are starving the people in Gaza. First of all, it's not true. And my question always is, if they're able to sneak in weapons into Gaza, how come they weren't able to sneak in food? And we know they're films, but it's easy to close your eyes when you didn't want to hear something. When Israel intercepted the boats of the people who came to protest on behalf of the people in Gaza, and they showed them the films, they all closed their eyes. Not just figuratively, they actually closed their eyes. Okay, when they do it, they know what's happening. They want to make believe that they don't. But the Jews who go around proclaiming, they don't want to hear. They don't want to know. They want to believe that everybody, that it's the Jews. It's not anti-Semitism. It's anti-Zionism. It's anti-whatever. So Rabbeinu Tam understood. Another crusade, even though the truth of the matter is, you had 3 crusades, one after the other. The second crusade wasn't as focused at killing Jews like the first and third. But there was reason to think that. But what happens in one city, in one town, spreads to the other town. And we always make believe. We close our eyes and we say, that happened over there. So, but Rabbeinu Tam was able to see. Rabbeinu Tam didn't close his eyes. But unfortunately, the Jews today, even when it's one day after the other, from one town to the other, they close their eyes. So that's the reason. And b'chol dor v'dor, omdim aleinu l'chalosenu. In every generation, and I always mention, we say milchama la'Hashem ba'amalek midor dor. The literal translation of milchama la'Hashem ba'amalek is not that there's a war from one generation to the other generation. The war against Amalek is a continuous war from the beginning of the generations, from the time of Moshe and Yoshua. That war is ongoing. If there's no nation of Amalek, how could the war ongoing? The ideology of Amalek is still around. May door, all the way back in time. That war continues to this day. It goes from town to town, from city to city. So I think perhaps that was what the Shach perhaps could have meant, or certainly his reason why. May door. In other words, identify it with what happened in the time of Rabbeinu Tam. It wasn't, and I always say, we say, b'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalosenu. In every generation and generation, they stand up to kill us. The question is, why didn't it just say b'chol dor in every generation? But people like to fool themselves. Oh, they say, this generation has one attitude. This generation has another attitude. That's true. You find generations that are disposed to communism. And you find generations that are disposed to capitalism. You find areas that are disposed to capitalism. You find areas in the world that are disposed to communism. But one thing, if it's a period of time that is disposed to communism, they'll say they did say the Jews are the capitalists. They're in charge of the banks. How many times did we hear that? And those who close their eyes put their fingers in their ears also. And the problem is that they don't use their head. And when it's a generation that is disposed to capitalism, well, who made the revolt? Who are the leading communists? The Jews, they'll say. B'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, regardless of what the disposition of the generation is. Omed aleinu l'chalosenu. The war against Amalek is a continuous war. It's not just from one generation to the other. It never ends. We have to be on constant guard. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have to be on guard against our own tendencies. Because it's easier for us at the beginning to assume one way. Like the people of Ritva, very nice people. Yirei Shemayim. It wasn't just Ritva, it was all the towns that way. And many yeshivas. Those who got out sometimes had to rebel against the administration. Because we want to believe that we're secure. It's difficult to leave our given situation. We survived for so many years, we'll continue to survive. It doesn't work that way. So so the Shach and those who reinstituted Sivan, they wanted to identify it. Yes, the whole world changed. Doesn't change as fast as it's changing now, but it changed in the hundreds of years between the time of Rabbeinu Tam and the time of the Shach. But it's the same war. It's not communism. It's not Zionism. I don't mean to talk against Zionism. But these are the stupid excuses that the fools give. The fools and the Rishayim. It's an ongoing battle. And that's why he wanted to identify the tragedy that took place. And they wanted to identify the tragedy that took place in France with the tragedy that took place here. Now, I want to have to cut it short because it's getting late and I'm a little over the time right now. Why is it that it was important that it not be on the Shabbos and need to be postponed? I think there is a lesson to be learned. And the lesson to be learned is, we know the Shita Davudram. Davudram says that if today Asar B'Teves never falls out on the Shabbos. Never falls out on the Shabbos. But in the time when they were Mekadesh al Pi Levana, when they declared the new month and the sighting of the new moon, they didn't use the calendar. So it happened that the fast day of Asara B'Teves, which commemorates the Jewish people being, in a bad way, of course, which is identified, I should say, that with the Jewish people, the Yerushalayim being encircled by the enemy, by the Babylonian army, when they laid siege to the city of Jerusalem. The beginning of the tragedy of the Churban, the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, of the first Commonwealth. So if Asar B'Teves fell out on the Shabbos, they would fast on Shabbos. The question is, why? Why did they institute it that way? Why didn't they institute it? It should be like Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, if it falls out on Shabbos. Now, Reb Chaim explains it with the psukim, but I want to understand the logic of the psukim. I think the logic of the psukim is the same thing. Is Asar B'Teves is the first, historically, of the incidents that the 4 fast days commemorate. The siege took place in Asar B'Teves. Shivasa B'Tammuz, they broke through the walls of Jerusalem. Tisha B'Av, they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. And then Tzom Gedalia, more or less, that they extinguished whatever was left. But the first event in that final battle was Asar B'Teves, the siege. The idea of Asar B'Teves is, when we re-experience, we have to re-experience in a way, perhaps, either we're joining them in what they did or what they should have done. And what's the idea? When we fast on one hand, we're mourning the tragedy. Fast is a form of, according to many Shitas, is a form of mourning also. But on the other hand, it's a cry for help. The fast days are crying for help. Jewish people are in trouble, in Golus and exile. But I think, but Asar B'Teves, of all the 4 fast days, represents the beginning. The idea when they said, if it falls on Shabbos, you fast Asar B'Teves and Shabbos, is perhaps more than any of the other 4 fast days. And they say, why? It's like Yom Kippur to a certain degree. Yom Kippur isn't the day of mourning. Yom Kippur is a day of crying out to God for help. Kasfeinu l'chayim, melech hafeish b'chayim. We ask God for help for ourselves, for our families, for the Jewish people, for the Jewish nation. Asar B'Teves is not so much mourning. The siege began then, but it's crying out for help. You have to cry out for help to God. In this week's Sedra, it's said that if an enemy attacks, an attack doesn't mean he stands over the border. You have to wait till they go over the border to shoot them. Today, if they have rockets aimed at your area and they say they're going to destroy, that's an attack already. So the Asar B'Teves represents, you have to nip it in the bud. Cry out. In the Torah tells us that when there'll be a war coming to your country, you have to blow the chatzotzros, and that includes the mitzvah tefillah of davening, is included, Beis Sarah, crying out to God. In other words, mourning can be postponed. Crying out to God for help, you should nip in the bud right at the beginning. And to emphasize this point, Asar B'Teves, even if it falls out in Shabbos, according to the Avudram, you fast on Shabbos. And I think that perhaps this is what the Shach was trying to say. In other words, we're not just fasting for mourning, because what happens, we have learned from the past incidents. It could be Chomensky. It could be an incident in one town. It could be the Crusades. All kinds of reasons come to mind why it won't happen. Might not happen the same way exactly, but it's going to happen. That's the nature of Golus. That's the nature of exile. So, because of that, you have to know, don't postpone. I heard foolish people saying about all these left-wingers who are openly talking against Israel, who are openly supporting the murderers, the ones who put the babies in Gaza in the ovens, the Jewish children in front of their mothers. I don't want to say the other things. Everybody knows them, even though they want to deny it. Oh, it can't happen here. Give them a chance. Give these politicians a chance. Give them a chance. Because you want to feel secure. So give them a chance not to do what the implicit message they have given to others to do. Sometimes people are born stupid. And sometimes people, because of a whim, because of a bad self-perception, a false bad perception that they have of themselves, they make themselves stupid. And that's what we're finding on a mass scale today. When it comes to crying out to God, when it comes to recognizing the trouble, to recognize that history is repeating itself over and over. Of the whole door vador, you could point to a million differences between one generation and the other, between one situation and the other. But here, every day, we see the same thing repeating itself from one city to another city, regardless of whether it's what type of country it is, what's the political nature of the country. We have to appeal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we have to stand guard. We have to recognize the danger and not fool ourselves that it should be HaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu Miyadam, that God saves us. And that was especially true about Sivan, because we made all those mistakes throughout our goals.
If anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat. So here's the question from about 10 minutes ago. Okay. Are you advocating for everyone who can move to Eretz Yisrael to do that rather than work to make changes from we are here in the U.S.?
No, I'm not advocating that at all at the present time. Individuals will be very good for them to move to Eretz Yisrael. But the mitzvah of Muhammad, especially of self-defense, is not just an obligation on the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. It's an obligation on the Jews everywhere. We in the United States fight our part of the war through the political means. If not for the support that Israel received just recently from the United States, we would like it to be better. But one thing's for sure, it's a lot better than all the previous administrations. People want to mold their perception of what's going on with the Jewish people on the basis of their political affiliations over here. It's good to have political affiliations, but the lives of the Jewish people of everywhere, but especially in Israel, has to come first. So we have to use, there are people that it's better that they go to Eretz Yisrael, but it's important to have a strong support for Israel here in the United States.
Could we make groups of Jews to physically defend Jews who are under physical threat from non-Jews?
Those are questions that have to be involved, and I'm not saying no. But those are questions that the individual case and the individuals involved have to be evaluated.
A follow-up to that is, if a specific community feels that they do need physical support, does that mean that members of that community need to be to support, or can they hire non-Jews who will be dependable to do that?
For sure. For sure. What is certainly accepted, but you have to make sure that it shouldn't be counterproductive.
Okay. Someone's saying Chicago is now using drones to monitor Rogers Park. Chicago meaning the person who's asking that, is that the police or is that community organizations? Right, working with local law enforcement.
Okay, that's so if you're working with local law enforcement, that's very good.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. Have a good week. We should hear good news. Inshallah Yisrael.
Amen.